Matt, I've got some questions as
You
well
hear
as,
them?
yeah,
Okay.
please, as well as our audience has some questions.
Perfect.
The first one is, I noticed on your data, which was kind of interesting, that you didn't have any type of survey data there. Maybe you use it, but it wasn't one of the boxes that was listed there. Do you use qualitative research at all and link that data into your churn and transaction models?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, we've done surveys in the past, and everybody says the reason they cancel is blackouts. I got blacked out, and they'll say either I love the product, it's great, or I got blacked out, it's the worst product ever, I'll never buy it again. So it's really hard if you're thinking about that kind of data. It's harder to work that in when it's kind of all over the place, because you'll look at some people who we can actually see, did they get blacked, did they try to request a stream they were blacked out for, and they won't have been, but they'll say that's the reason they're canceling. So it's tougher, and generally speaking too, we wouldn't have that on like a everyone. To think about it that way too, it's harder to fill in those missing blanks if you only have it on a very small number of people.
Okay. One of the questions asked was, I assume by technology they either mean platform, meaning software, hardware, and or predictive models. What technology did you use to build your churn models and why?
Sure, no, that's a great question. So a little bit of background on me. I'm a math stats guy. Started in SAS, and then I'm slowly, obviously SaaS is good for the modeling part, but the rolling up of the data, I had to learn a lot of SQL along the way, and I've got a fantastic team who helps me with that. And for this last round of modeling, we built some in SAS and then some in Python. We're kind of moving to be a Python shop. I think that's kind of where the future is probably going to be.
Just for an interest, I don't know, I guess we could have asked this question. I could ask in my wrap up too. How many people here are shops where they are? Are? Okay, let's call it SAS, Python. Interesting.
I think it's a mix. I mean, you absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's not obvious who the winner is going to be, but there's there's probably lots of heterogeneity. One of the questions I had, and also hear from your presentation, is how do you link offline media to MLB TV? If at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've thought about that, and I think that's just something that we're going to have to wrestle with, because I think that absolutely is very interesting.
Okay, one of the questions asked here, and I'm going to modify it a little bit, is if one of your predictor variables, which you listed, is team performance, last time I checked, that's a random variable that you don't control.
That's right.
And so if you're going to build a predictive model for churn, and you're going to, as I think it was our Dean Jeff Garrett joke, I always say prediction's only hard about the future. It means you need a predictive model for team performance if that's one of the X's in your churn model. So my question to you is, how do you build a predictive model for churn with performance as an X if you don't know performance and you can't control it?
That's a great question. So just to be clear, for the 2016 season, we used all 2015 data to kind of build the models, and then we monitor them nightly to kind of look and see is the model scoring people correctly. So I think I'm not you do.
So you're not necessarily trying to predict 6 months. Like I'm sitting here, it's April, it's opening day. Let me try to predict churn for September, which means if one of my very significant predictors is team performance, I would need to build a model that predicts 5 months in advance team performance.
Right. No. I think that's a great question. I think that the kind of I would say we're controlling for it, and we're thinking things like, generally speaking, looking across the league, when a team gets say 10 games back, or are they they're playing below 500, or kind of the things we're looking for when we talk about team performance. Because I think that's an excellent point there.
One of the questions asked here is about customer lifetime value. Do you guys have other revenue streams except for, let's call it the streaming video service, and or do you guys think about customer lifetime value?
Of course. No, we certainly do. Another source of revenue, or there's a few sources. Certainly online tickets. There's some of the we do get a cut of that revenue from teams, and then another thing would be gear. The online, you go to MLB shop. That we're certainly generating money there. We found that generally speaking that those, especially the streaming product and tickets seem to be a trade-off product, since this is an out-of-market product. But if you do want to figure out people that are MLB TV subscribers, what you do is and we've done this, is you look at people who go to multiple games with the same away team. That's essentially them showing if just for argument's sake, say that the you know, I live in New York and say I'm a, you know, the only time I go to Mets games are when the San Francisco Giants are in town. I'm probably a Giants fan, and that's actually a good person to try to sell MLB TV to.
So do you guys also do work with individual teams? Because I imagine that MLB TV and MLB as a whole benefits when individual teams benefit. Or are you
Sure.
guys, another way to think about it is, are you guys a centralized resource for all the teams? Like, are you willing to push analytics models to all 32 teams? Or do you guys work with individual teams? How does that work?
That's a great question. So a couple years ago, actually, I was down here at this very conference speaking about lead scoring. I was here with a gentleman from the Milwaukee Brewers.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. But what we do is we do engage with teams to try to help them prioritize their ticket leads, whether that be season seat holder renewals, or we look at things, you know, single game buyers, you know, who are likely to upgrade. So we really kind of are the hub, and certainly we work with probably more, you know, we're up to nearly 20 teams we're doing that with now.
How do you think about, I know one of the things that has really helped, let's call it football and other sports, has been fantasy. Now, MLB fantasy, well, I have a 17-year-old son who's doing it. It pops up on my phone every 3 seconds. Do you guys, what role do you think fantasy sports will be in kind of, you know, immersing people even more in the MLB experience and the role it could possibly have on streaming?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's you know, I think DirecTV does a thing now where you can actually monitor your fantasy team. You know, that's the NFL kind of know, Sunday package, and I think that those are features that we definitely would like to incorporate into the product because it's fantasy. You know, there's probably, if you think about like just baseball fans, there's, you know, you could, people talked about segmentation earlier. There's probably people who are fans of baseball because of fantasy baseball, right? Versus that person who, I'm a fan because I grew up in going to Mets games with my dad. You know, you know, so I think there's definitely, you know, it definitely plays a very important role.
Now, I'm sure one of the reasons that, for those people that don't know, maybe I have a question, but let me have you explain first, I know why, but other people here may not, why there's local blackouts. Because the question, which is not surprising, is what's the relationship between your subscription sales and actual game ticket sales, the idea of cannibalization? So maybe you could talk a little bit about local blackouts and why historically those rules have come.
So if you think about baseball teams, the way that they're getting their product out for the most part are something called regional sports networks. And a lot of the teams own those regional sports networks, and they, you know, they want you to have a cable subscription, right? They're the content creator. You know, that's kind of another, you know, revenue stream. So for the most part, this isn't a cannibalization product from that. This would be people who are not, I mean, they can turn on their TV, they're just not going to get the game that they're watching.
Yeah, so the key is, just to make people understand, like I live obviously here in Philadelphia, I can't get the Phillies game on MLB TV. If I want to get it, I either have to go to my local provider or I have to go to the game. And so that's kind of the, you know, that also is another way to prevent cannibalization. One of the things you had mentioned relates actually a little bit to Ari's talk from earlier. So you have all of these 20,000 variables, et cetera. How do you think about, are the models you fit purely what I'll call linear regression type models, or do you guys look for like tree-like models? Like, for example, the people that are going to be really likely to churn are people over the age of 50 that live in large cities. You know, it could be described by a 7-way interaction, or you could put it into a random forest and generate out some tree-like patterns. How do you guys think about these more complex or subtle interactions?
No, that's a great question. What we've done is I think Python gives us a huge advantage, is we're able to, you can, you know, once you have your data there, you can kind of pull it through many different algorithms. We stuck with logistic regression because it's very explainable and kind of getting this off the ground. There was a lot of hand-holding, and I think that what we found is we do kind of have a very linear problem here. So there's not, you know, we were able to, you know, we can really use a very much more sophisticated model, but what happens is it gets a black box, and maybe some business folks go, well, I don't get it now. You know, and so if you're really, you know, if you can, you know, basically I'm a huge believer in the simplest way you can possibly do it. I would recommend doing it that way.
By the way, if you've got a bunch of people at MLB that can understand log odds, please let them, I'd like to know who those people are, because most people understand simple regression barely on 0-1 variables. And it's impressive that you've got people you think that understand how to do log odds from logistic regression. Maybe one other question, maybe our last question is, I noticed you did, and this is a very interesting thing for many of us, you did what I'd call a cohort analysis. Like, you didn't analyze all the data together. You said, well, the people that maybe started in March are different than the people that started in April. Could you talk to all of us about why that's crucial? You talked a little bit about it in your slides, but why is kind of allowing for non-stationarity in this cohort way, why is that crucial?
Well, I think, you know, thinking about the baseball season and certainly these subscribers, it's so seasonal. And if we talk about, you know, the number of times you use in the first, you know, say 5 or 10 days of your subscription, that's going to be very, very kind of a different distribution of subscribers in April when, wow, baseball just started, everybody's so hungry for the product, versus that first 30 days for the people who joined in August. So when we started, again, we built a model kind of on, you know, all subscribers who were not auto-renewed across, you know, their first 30 days. And then, you know, okay, and then we'll run that model, and on each month individually, it's like, wait a minute. Something isn't right here. You know, we've got some very different things happening. And so that's why I, you know, kind of touched on it in my talk. We kind of modeled through a bunch of different populations. And so that's when we said, okay, you know, let's take a step back and let's actually, you know, analyze the data. Let's figure out what's going on here. And it's, you know, usage is kind of the big driver there.
It's probably good advice for many people here that either time of acquisition, channel of acquisition, et cetera. In some sense, there's no theorem that says that those populations are identical. As a matter of fact, they're probably going to be heterogeneous in a very meaningful way.
Right.
Well, let's thank Matt for a very informative and interesting talk.
Thanks so much.